South Africa could avoid being greylisted by the Financial Action Task Force. Auditing firm PwC says the country has been able to make progress in addressing compliance and has fast-tracked reforms aimed at avoiding greylisting. The task force is meeting this week to determine whether the country has done enough to address deficiencies in its current legal framework, as well as the effectiveness of its implementation. The policy's compliance with anti-money laundering and terror financing measures will decide whether to include South Africa on the so-called grey list. Let's discuss this a little bit more now with PwC forensics partner Karen Wood. She specializes in risk and regulation. And what a big risk this is for South Africa, to be grey listed or not to be grey listed. I want to start where you've made an interesting observation as PwC South Africa. Karen, good afternoon and welcome to today. Your view is that a lot of progress has been made to address technical compliance. Do you think this will be enough to avoid us being grey-listed?
Hi, Dan, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today. It is a difficult question to answer. As you know, when the mutual evaluation reports are issued, they look at two aspects. The one, as you mentioned, is technical compliance, which tests us against the 40 FATF recommendations. And the second is on the effectiveness of our framework. Now, the point that we wanted to make is that a lot has been done in relation to the technical compliance aspects. So if you look at the report, we rated ourselves essentially as either non-compliant or partially compliant, only in relation to 50% of the criteria that are put forward for technical compliance. In particular, we scored 3 out of 6 on this big, what they call the big 6 criteria for technical compliance. Over the last many months, the authorities have done really well at improving that technical compliance framework through a number of legislative reforms. And I think it's quite noteworthy that they've done those or given effect to those changes within a very, very short period of time. Whether that technical compliance is going to be sufficient to avoid grey listing remains to be seen. And that's because of the effectiveness aspect. So FATF will test us against the 11 immediate outcomes and determine whether we have done enough not only to show technical compliance, but also sufficient effectiveness criteria. And I think it's in relation to that aspect where the unknowns largely lie. Yeah. We rated as low or moderate in relation to all 11 of those items. And not a lot of work has been done on the effectiveness angle, and that's where we are at risk currently.
Yeah, the effective angle, does it speak to the enforcement, for example, by the relevant law enforcement agencies in terms of the competency to investigate? Because, I mean, globally, we know how complex this the world of global illegal, illicit flows is.
Absolutely, Dan. So it speaks to a couple of issues. Number one, the extent to which FATF sees the regulators actually enforcing or applying what they call a risk-based approach to on-sites. Secondly, the extent to which the authorities are sufficiently capacitated or have the right capabilities to conduct these rather complex investigations into anti-money laundering. And thirdly, also around the extent to which South Africa has relied on mutual legal assistance from other countries to actually forward those types of criminal investigations. And those are 3 of the main areas that we would expect there to be movement.
Yeah, and I'm just mindful of time as we're approaching 4 o'clock at the top of the hour. And I need to ask you this for the benefit of somebody who might say, okay, so what does it mean if we get grey listed? What does it mean?
So each country has shown a different response to grey listing in the sense of the economic impact. And by no means am I an economist. But what we are likely to see is that there is a risk of a number of things happening. So there could be a de-risking by a number of our counterparties, so other countries or other institutions who want to remove themselves from the South African connection. So it essentially places us on a naughty list, and people will look at South Africa as representing a higher level of money laundering risk and be less likely to want to engage with us until we actually can demonstrate that level of effectiveness. And that will operate at an individual level, so per bank, and at an overall level. So the IMF would look at us, for example, as being part of that naughty list and be probably a little bit more hesitant to provide us with funding, or the terms on which they would provide us with funding would be different. So what is going to be important for us going forward is, if we are placed on that list, is getting off that list as soon as possible. Because the longer we're on that list, the more extensive the impact.
And what, very briefly, is it possible to get off the grey list if we got onto it? And how urgently would we have to move?
Look, estimates are that if we are on the list for less than 24 months, that the impact is going to be about 1% of GDP, and if it's longer than that, up to 3%. So we want to get off that list very quickly. And if we can demonstrate our commitment to effectiveness, and we are strong on our public-private partnerships to demonstrate that, we should, similar to Mauritius, be able to get off that list within a 2-year period. But we've got to demonstrate that we've got our foot on that pedal, and we're going to continue to prove our commitment to anti-money laundering. Okay,
last question to you. I've seen what other commentators have said about the likelihood of us being grey-listed this week. How likely is it? I mean, do you think, are we 80%, 80% likely, 70% likely?
So, Dan, if you'd asked me that question towards the end of last year, I probably would have said at least 85% likely. If I compare us to other countries that have been grey-listed, we have done slightly better. Have we done enough to put in place the framework? Yes, but I think we are potentially still at risk from an effectiveness perspective. That percentage is hard to say, but I'd say that it's definitely improved off the latter part of last year.
You sound very optimistic. Thank you very much, Karen Wood. She's, of course, from a PwC. She leads South Africa's risk and response at PwC.